All right. Hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still on hold for a bit, I figured I would bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster Season 3, intriguing interviews with creative minds. So many of us are Star Wars fans, so tonight we're going to go behind the mask as we journey to a galaxy far, far away to discuss The Mandalorian. First up on our panel is my friend, returning guest, and birthday girl, Mary Fan, a Jedi in disguise and serial aerialist. Ooh,
Hi.
say that 3 times fast. She is the multi-talented author of sci-fi and fantasy tales about intrepid heroines, including her fabulous Star-Swept trilogy, editor of the Badass Moms Anthology, and one of my fellow inmates in the Crazy 8 Press Asylum. Welcome back, Mary.
Thank you.
All right. Also on our panel is my friend KARISSA LAUREL. She writes science fiction and fantasy and is the author of the paranormal romance Touch of Smoke, the urban fantasy series The Norse Chronicles, and the Stormborn Chronicles, a young adult epic steampunkish fantasy series. Welcome, KARISSA.
Hi, everybody.
All right. And last but not least, welcome back, ZAKI Hassan. ZAKI is a professor of communication and media studies and member of the San Francisco Bay Area Film Critics Circle. His reviews and analysis have appeared in venues such as the San Francisco Chronicle, IGN, and Philly Weekly, and he's co-host of the Movie Film Podcast. He has also contributed to books on the Star Wars, Planet of the Apes, and Blade Runner franchises. Welcome back, ZAKI.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions you have for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. So let's jump in. All right. So The Mandalorian seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. You know, unless you were familiar with the animated series, The Clone Wars or Rebels, all we really knew going in was that The Mandalorian sort of looked like Boba Fett. The series is set about 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So when you first heard about the show and it just got it started, what was your reaction to The Mandalorian? Mary.
So at first I was a little bit, I'm gonna say I was a little bit disappointed, mostly because I like Boba Fett. And you know, there was supposed to be a Boba Fett movie, and then they started talking about The Mandalorian, and then the Boba Fett movie got scrapped. And so it was kind of being said that, oh, they decided not to do Boba Fett in favor of this new character. And I was like, that's cool, but I really wanted Boba Fett, so I was a little bummed out. But then I was at Star Wars Celebration back in, I think it was 2018 when they announced it. And I was actually in the panel where the cast were just like talking about it, and they premiered like the first 5 minutes of footage. And oh my God, it blew me away. And I was like, sign me up. This is like the gritty space Western of my dreams.
ZAKI.
Yeah, I remember my reaction kind of being, you know, I've said all along that the fandom for Boba Fett always kind of escaped me. Like I was like, I think he's a great looking character, but I felt like he's got 5 minutes of screen time, and you know, the cult that sprang up around him always, you know, it passed me by. I wasn't anti, I was just no, I wouldn't say I was pro. And so when I heard about this, I was like, okay, it felt like I was like doing the math. I was like, all right, so Jon Favreau is trying to tap into the Boba Fett mystique and kind of do his own thing. So I was like, I'm interested in what his own thing looks like, but it was also like the Fett factor alone and whatever connection, that was not enough to get me super excited. So it was Star Wars that was getting me in the door more than whatever fetishness, the fetish, if you will, was not the thing that was going to get me in. So I went into the pilot with very low expectations, and so I came out very pleasantly surprised by not only the production value, as Mary said, but just the fact that it was like, oh, it's like Star Wars, but it's not the Star Wars that we've gotten all this time. It's something a little bit different.
So KARISSA, let me ask you. So before we get into the specific elements of The Mandalorian, what's your take on the tone and the feel of the show? Does it feel like it belongs in the Star Wars universe?
Absolutely. To me, it does feel very much. I would argue that it's more Star Wars than some of the newer stuff that we've gotten. It really does feel like it took place after the original trilogy. And one thing people don't probably know that much about me who know me is that I'm a huge fan of Westerns. I love the movies and books. Like I'm a huge Louis L'Amour fan. I read a ton of his books. And so, you know, yes, it's Star Wars. I mean, it is very Star Wars to me. And so it definitely checked that box. But I've so enjoyed the moments when little things have happened either aesthetically or tropishly or however that I'm just like, that's straight out of a Western. You know, that's a quick draw. That's a high noon gunfight, you know, all the things that you recognize from the genre. And I just, that pleased me too. And maybe somebody who's not as much of a fan of Westerns, maybe, I don't know if that would have deterred their enjoyment of this, because I think you don't have to like Westerns. I think there is enough Star Wars, enough here, there's enough space, there's enough pew pew lasers, there's enough wizardry to satisfy the Star Wars fan. But there's so much more too. And that's what I really love about the layers that this builds up over the time and over the 2 seasons.
Mary?
Yes.
So how about you? Does this feel like a Star? Does it belong? Does it feel like it belongs in the Star Wars universe?
I actually feel like in terms of aesthetic, it looks more Star Wars than anything else that's come out since Return of the Jedi. Because, you know, the prequels took us to an entirely different era. And what like the main complaints about it is that it doesn't look like the original trilogy, which personally I'm fine with because it's supposed to be like pre-fall of the civilization. And then the new movies take place, you know, a good 30 years after Return of the Jedi. And even though it was closer in aesthetic to the originals, it still wasn't the same. And I think a lot of that has to do with setting. You know, a lot of the originals were, as Carissa said, like kind of Westerns, and they were very intentionally so. They were inspired by Westerns. They were kind of based on that whole idea. I mean, there's a reason why it was kind of set in the desert in the first place. And The Mandalorian is really the first time we've gotten to really go back to that, like, really Western inspired space story, and, you know, have like, you know, the broken down vehicles, you know, you can almost smell the grease coming out of the screen and the quick draw moments. And yeah, I almost feel like it's more of a Western in some ways than a space show in some episodes. And I love it.
Zaki?
I think, you know, I've said earlier on Twitter that what really I've appreciated about both of these 2 seasons is the level of world building that Favreau and Filoni have done in terms of building out the post Return of the Jedi, you know, landscape, spacescape, if you will, you know, and that's something that we didn't get really at all in the sequel films, which I like them, but I'm kind of like, it's an entirely different status quo from where Return of the Jedi left. And I really like that this, in that sense, feels like a true continuation, but, you know, adjacent to all of the sort of the familiar, the Skywalker characters, if you will. Well, I mean, notwithstanding the last like 5 minutes of the season 2 finale, but I mean, it's adjacent to all that stuff. So it lets us see the Star Wars universe without having to be indentured to specific Star Wars characters.
All right, so look, so Mary, I'm queuing this one up right for you first. We can't talk about The Mandalorian without talking about Grogu. What's your take on the character?
Oh my God. First of all, he will always be Baby Yoda to me. I do love how in The Mandalorian, every name reveal is just sort of like, whatever. I'm going to keep calling him Mando and Baby Yoda. So like everyone else, I was like, aw, how cute when he first came on the screen. And that continued for, I think, most of season 1. But at a certain point, I started seriously worrying about this so-called child moralities, because he's just running around doing whatever he wants with like no consequence other than a little, hey, don't do that, not learning anything. And then you find out later on that he's not that, like, it's not like he's a newborn or anything. He's supposed to be 50 years old, which I know in this universe is still like a child for his species. But it said that he was like trained at the Jedi temple, you know, with Master Yoda and stuff. So I'm like, I don't know about this kid anymore. Like, you know, if he's been trained and stuff and he's this powerful and yet he's still going around doing whatever he wants, that could be dangerous. And toward the middle of season 2, it really felt like, I feel like the writers or somebody were a little too enamored with the whole idea of, haha, Baby Yoda's causing problems again. And to me, it just wasn't funny anymore. Like just seeing this like entitled little brat going around, you know, killing other babies. And I was like, please stop. It's not fun anymore. But then toward the end, you know, after he was like kidnapped and stuff, I was like, okay, I don't want him to like actually get in trouble.
Carissa? You muted.
Yeah, I mean, I came at it, Mary and I have actually talked about this specific issue before. I come at it with a slightly different perspective, being a parent of a 18-year-old now boy that I have raised. And there were times when his morality seriously worried me as he grew up. And now that he's 18 and, approaching manhood and everything, I have pretty good faith that he's going to be a good person as he grows up. But, there was a lot of reinforcement we had to do with parents. And, Grogu hasn't had that stability. And so I was willing to give him a little bit of leniency, maybe more than Mary was, as far as some of his antics, because my kid also had kind of a rough start with stability in his early years. And I knew how that played into some of the troubles that we faced throughout adolescence and everything, and how much stability has helped him, overcome some of those things. So that was my hope for the Grogu character as well. I mean, I think he's adorable, and and they sure did a great job making him just as sympathetic as possible with the basic character design. It's hard to not want to see him succeed, and when something bad or evil happens to him, it's just that much more horrifying, because he's, as cute as a baby puppy, and you don't want to see anybody ever be mean to a cute baby puppy. So that was smart aesthetically to make him that way. But I did appreciate that the transition from season 1 to season 2, he definitely had more presence as a character. He became a little bit more than a sidekick and just a prop. And when I went back and actually just rewatched the Ahsoka episode, and she talks about how he had a lot of training, but that she thinks it's best for him to just let it go and forget it over the years, because she's afraid to lead him down the wrong path. And so I guess, that would be his inevitable end if it had just gone on without any guidance or without any interference from the Jedi. Possibly his powers would have just disappeared. I don't exactly know, but I thought that was an interesting, I kind of had missed that the first watch through. So I don't know what would have happened to him if it hadn't ended like it ended. But I had higher hopes for his, morality or ethics or whatever, even though his father figure was a bounty hunter. There was a possibility he could still come out to be a good person if somebody would just give him that structure.
So as a slight follow-up, so I know they were going for laughs, but one issue that I really had was when Grogu was eating the eggs.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I get it. Like, it's like, oh, haha, you naughty boy. But meanwhile, like they're really talking about, these are the last eggs of our civilization. And if they die, we die with it. And even to the very, like the last shot, he kind of goes like, and I laughed despite myself, because it's a sight gag by itself, but it was just very wrong. It was sort of tonally wrong. They kind of picked I felt like they picked the wrong moment to use kind of like a sight gag on it. It like undercut the integrity of the relationship and the character. Zaki, what was your thoughts there?
I definitely, I think we're supposed to feel uncomfortable. I think it, you described it as laughing uncomfortably. I think that's the laugh they were going for. It's not meant to be a knee slapper, but it is meant to point out, like, this is a kid. He's a very powerful, undisciplined kid. And the fact that he has been put to the lap of this person who has no connections. That episode is just one example of Din Djarin having to not be, a Mandalorian. It's about him being a parent. How do you just deal with that type of stuff? I'm just earlier today, I was dealing with two of my kids writing on the couch, not exactly any way remotely the same as eating the eggs of a dying species, but it's one of those things where you're like, how do I deal with this? And so the frustration that he felt, I think to some extent we feel it. Like we're we're laughing because otherwise we'd cry, you know?
So the character, our lead character, so Mando, is in the old Western style, sort of the lone gunman who says little. He sort of protects the innocent despite his sort of vagabond ways. So talk to me about Mando and his evolution across 2 seasons. Mary, what's your take on him?
I feel like when he started out, he was kind of a bit dry, and I've talked to some other viewers who felt the same way, who were just like, it's really hard to get into him as a character when you don't see his face, you know nothing really about him. He just kind of, he's more of an action figure than a character. And I feel like they've done a really good job in season 2 of really expanding on his humanity, because in season 1, we really didn't get a lot of, his personality. We got some backstory, but ultimately those were all just facts. Like, we didn't really know who he was. And I think that was partially, like, that might have been partially intentional, because he's supposed to be this mysterious lone gunman figure, and he himself is, he's not a very open person. He's not going to start talking about his feelings or anything. At the same time, I feel like they could have done a little more in season 1 to show us who he is behind the mask without physically taking the mask off. But yeah, you can definitely see how he's evolved over the 2 seasons and how he has opened up more, especially with like Baby Yoda and taking on the role of father figure.
Zaki?
Yeah, I think for me, I had that reaction in the first season where I was like, I get the code and I get all that, and we got to have him be this man of mystery. But I found it in that first year, I found it a little bit frustrating that we weren't seeing his face, and partially because I like Pedro Pascal. I'm like, this guy's a great actor. He's got an expressive face, And what really, when you watch the first 2 seasons and Toto, what you realize is those entire first two seasons all are buying you the last 3 minutes of season 2, and they make that ending so much more meaningful than it and in any other context would have been. And that's something that you can really only appreciate when you have all 20 of these episodes or whatever it is to watch together.
Actually, I was going to save that for later, but you brought it up, so we'll talk about it now. So at the very, very end, we're getting down to, the surprises have happened, and it's sort of at the final moment, right? We've had how many, whatever it is, 18 episodes, or I forget how much, 16 episodes, whatever it was, and they've had their adventures. When Grogu was initially taken, my take is that Mando gave up too easily. Because I just rewatched the whole series, and I have to say, I found that if you binge watch it, I felt the season was a lot stronger than when I watched it week to week, because the threads felt stronger, had more connective tissue. But he said at one point, he's like, the kid's gone, what can I do? Then we get that scene where he has that little holographic image to Gideon. He said, you have something that belongs to me, and you have no idea. You'll never know how much it means to me. Now, at that moment, that was a striking contrast from his initial, well, he's gone. What was your, Karissa, thoughts on what I've just said here?
I knew you were going to call me. And I was like, I don't remember that. I did rewatch the last episode very recently, and I watched the first season, but so I don't remember the specific moment you're talking about. But explanation for it would be just, and I don't, without rewatching it, I can't be certain, but my explanation for B is my initial reaction to any emotional situation is to distance myself from it. So the first time something happens, I mean, I don't doubt for a second that that Ben cares strongly for the child, throughout, especially the second season. So I think if he says, so what? He's gone now. It's a protective mechanism, a protective reflex for this hard-boiled cowboy character who has always probably spent his life shielding himself from emotions ever since his parents' tragic ending as a child. And I think that would be his first reflex, is just to say, I'm not going to emotionally respond to that because it's too painful. But like most of us who would have that sort of protective reflex, there, your heart and your mind then speaks and says, but that's not the truth. That's not who you really are. And when he was actually called out on it and challenged, you know, he's gonna fall back on who he really is, and who he really is especially for the whole second season is a parent, and he wasn't going to deny that.
Mary, what was your take on it?
I will say, like, when he made his big speech, it did feel a little surprising just how powerfully he felt about Baby Yoda, because, you know, you got the connection there, but just the way, like, the passion with what he was like, "You've taken something from me. I have no idea what it means to me." And I was like, whoa, I knew you liked the kid, but dang, that's intense, man. But maybe that's because, you know, like Karissa has said, he's like, you know, this tough cowboy character. He doesn't show his feelings. You know, when confronted with his feelings, he just pushes them away. And this was him finally letting loose.
All right. So throughout the 2 seasons, we were introduced to several new characters and some old favorites, including Boba Fett. We met Fennec Shand, Cara Dune, Bo-Katan, and Moff Gideon. How did you feel about the texture that they brought to the series? Zaki?
I really, it's going back to what I said before, I really like how everything that this show does feels of a piece, you know, in a visual sense and thematic sense with the original trilogy, and yet it expands it outward. And that goes to what I was saying earlier. You know, this feels like the truest continuation of those original 3 films that we've ever gotten on screen. You know, and again, I like the sequels, but that to me is something different. This is, here's what happened after Return of the Jedi. Oh, you like Boba Fett? Well, and by the way, I was just talking about how I wasn't a big Boba Fett fan. I wasn't a big Boba Fett fan until season 2 of The Mandalorian. Now, you know, plug Boba Fett into my veins, you know? That's what this show did for me.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I thought was interesting, and for you guys and for anyone who's watching, I was just telling these guys that before I watched The Mandalorian, I watched the 2 animated series, The Clone Wars and Rebels. And both series dive really deep throughout the seasons about the backstory of the Mandalorians and Mandalore. So the version of Mando that we get is sort of a really, it's a sliver, it's an offshoot of a much bigger world. And there were power plays back and forth about who was in control of Mandalore. There were Mandalorians, the fighters, there were Mandalorians, the peacekeepers, then there were fighters, and there were factions. So the suit that we see, right, that Mando is in, Mandalorians by nature are not bounty hunters. That's not who they are. That's not what they do at all. There's a faction of them that had sort of split off, and they kind of refer to a little bit of the backstory. Bo-Katan shows up a couple of times in the series, but the history of the Mandalorians and Mandalore, it exists within the world of Star Wars. But when I watched the Mandalorian the first time, I was like, oh, okay, they talk about some stuff. But having watched the animated series all the way through, and then I watched The Mandalorian again, The Mandalorian is like a completely different show for me now, because there's so much texture and I understand the significance of who they are and why it's important. And that whole bit with, you know, he never shows his face, that's not a thing in the normal history of the Mandalorians. This is a very unique thread of this new iteration of the kind of the sect that he comes from. So I guess my question is, do you feel that based on the show alone, did you get enough of the Mandalorian backstory to satisfy you? Or did you feel that they were just gaps that were, was it enough because I don't need to know what happened before? Was it enough by itself? Or did you feel that there was stuff that was missing? Mary?
I think largely they did a good job of making it so that you didn't have to go and watch other stuff, which I'm really glad for, because the fact is we now have an alarming amount of Star Wars content out there. And if it was like, so you have a similar thing going on in WandaVision, where like I had a friend who wanted to watch it and she had to go back and watch something like 20 MCU movies so that she could watch WandaVision and like really get it. And, you know, I worry that something similar will happen to Star Wars just because of the sheer amount of content, it'll become inaccessible to new fans. And so what The Mandalorian, I feel like, has done a good job of is not making that the case, where it's like you could wander in off the street having never watched Star Wars before, just being mildly interested in some space show about like a cowboy or something, and like actually understand what's going on. Like they do a really good job of, not being so married to the back, to the originals that, you have to watch like 9 films or whatever to understand it, while also throwing in a lot of references. And in terms of like, so I have not watched the animated series. I keep meaning to, and then I keep getting distracted. But having not watched them, I still, kind of understood who Bo-Katan was when she came on screen, who Ahsoka was. There was a little in like the Mandalore backstory around Bo-Katan that I was a little confused about, but I might just not have been paying enough attention.
No, I mean, I could say that they don't give you a lot. Again, it holds up better if you binge watch it. The whole thread of the 2 seasons, it feels more solid than if you watch it sort of week to week. But there's so much backstory with the Mandalorians. There's no way they could squeeze it into this show. Like Bo-Katan's backstory couldn't be told in the show to satisfactorily explain all the stuff that happens. It would just be impossible. So here's a question for you. So one of the better redemption stories that I've seen in a while centered around the character of Mayfield, portrayed by Bill Burr. So Zaki, what'd you think?
It was great. I think in the first season, I mean, he's Bill Burr in Star Wars. Like there's, and if you like his comedy and say, oh, well, that's he's being Bill Burr, and that's fine. But what I really liked in the second season was they added the level of tragedy and pathos to him. And really, I mean, he is unlike any character we've ever gotten in Star Wars, just in sort of the immediacy, and that he feels very much reflective of a, contemporary point of view, but and the presentation. But this idea of an Imperial who's carrying the guilt of everything he did, like, that's new, and that's what this universe allows for. That's what there's room for now. Mary was talking about how there's so much of this content, and that's both blessing and curse. I think one blessing is this, is we get these types of digressions that are so fruitful. I mean, I think what we saw with that character, I don't know that we would have gotten that in a film. That's what's great about being able to do these TV shows.
All right, so we talked about it a little bit before, Mary, you brought it up, and Karissa. So for me, one of the highlights was the return of Ahsoka Tano. Now, just seeing her if you'd never seen the character, didn't know anything about her, she was still pretty badass by herself. If you ever get a chance to watch the animated series, you will understand just how absolutely, unbelievably incredible this character is, and seeing her come back is really something significant. There was something else I missed it the first time. She makes a reference to Grand Admiral Thrawn. So talk to me about that. What'd you think, Karissa?
I had to, and I just watched that episode again, and I remembered that when she, the leader of the town that she is living on the outskirts of, that have sent Mando out to hunt her down. When they have their final battle at the end, that's when she confronts her and says, "Where is Thrawn?" But I don't know that much about Thrawn, because for me, I only know him as a character that was more or less existed in the books, and I never read the book series associated with them. So I can't say that much about that one. I watched, fortunately, a lot of this series with my kid, who is an encyclopedia and has seen all the cartoons and has, been on all the Wikipedias and the boards and everything. And he's great for explaining the backstory of almost everything that I didn't know. But that's one I'm really shy on. So I probably comment. But I did notice her asking about that, actually, this episode, and I would have gone and done more research, because I did miss that the first time. And I was like, I wonder why she's bringing that up. I don't know.
Mary, Zaki, any thoughts here?
Well, for me personally, I remember when I watched the episode, the first thought I had was, this feels like a backdoor pilot for an Ahsoka series, which is of course what it turned out to be. As far as right, and bringing in Thrawn, like you, I'm a huge fan of the animated stuff. So knowing what Rebels had done with him, that made me very excited. That and obviously Dave Filoni being involved means he's trying to connect all these threads, and so I'm like, how do we get from where he was at the end of Rebels or his arc in Rebels to wherever he is when Ahsoka presumably crosses paths with him, right? And it's
Yeah.
all these, what I love about this era of Star Wars, it's all yes and. It's all yes and. We're gonna open a door to this. Yes and we're gonna do this, and it's so many possibilities. It's amazing.
So for those who haven't seen it, so Grand Admiral Thrawn is a key villain in Rebels, and I will not go into what his storyline was, but it's significant. So him being mentioned now was, and again, the first time I watched the show, I completely missed that she even said it. When I watched it again, she said it. I was like, oh boy. So if you ever get the chance, Rebels by itself, it'll have a lot more impact if you ever get that chance. All right, so let's move on to so this is just sort of a side thing that just sort of struck me as I watched the series again. And so Mary, this is one for you. One thing that struck me was the idea of sort of tracking, right? So initially there's a tracking fob for Grogu, right? Okay, here, go find him, and Mando finds the beep, 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 and he tracks him down. So my first question is, how does that even work, right?
Star Wars magic.
Right, but then secondly, though, it's amazing how many times the ship, like the Razor Crest, they plant a tracker. Don't you think, wouldn't you think that by now they can travel at the speed of light? Wouldn't they have tech that would detect a tracking device on your ship?
Well, I mean, as The Last Jedi showed, you can track people even in hyperspace. So whatever, it's Star Wars magic. Don't think too much about it. It's good for the plot.
I know, and I completely I didn't even think about it. The first time I watched it, I didn't even think about it, and the second time I was like, wait a second, they track. But what was also interesting is that they used the tracking fob to find Grogu at the beginning, but then when he's stolen later, suddenly the tracking fob, they don't even think to mention, like, oh, I have the little thing that can follow him.
No, why would you do that? It would be inconvenient for the plot.
Okay. All right. So switching from comical to so maybe a touchy subject for some. Let's talk about Gina Carano. There was obviously a knee-jerk reaction among some, maybe without knowing all the facts, to applaud her firing. Were her offenses overblown, or was that legit? Anyone?
I know Karissa has some things to say about this.
I'm passionate about the character. Am I still me? Okay. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I was getting a flash up that said I was still muted. Okay, so I'm extremely passionate about the character of Cara Dune. In fact, having just rewatched the last episode of season 2, I always get super emotional, like at Wonder Woman in the fight scenes. Anytime women, not just one woman who gets to kick ass, but when women do it together in a group and they are the majority, that gets me emotional. But the thing specifically about Cara Dune's character that women so rarely get to be on TV is not just the kick-ass, Ahsoka could do that. She is the brawn. She is the brute. She is the muscle. She was an MMA fighter, and you believe it. That I was watching her in the season 1 doing some wrestling moves in the episode where she meets Mando. And you know that she's doing that for real because she has the training, and you believe it and you buy it. And for the first time, I'm like, that's a woman who, can work the big guns, who can, lift the heavy lifting. And we so rarely get to do that. And I was so happy to see her presented that way and be that brawny, brute muscle that women never get to be. And I cheered for her. So it breaks my heart that this happened. I don't support anything that the actress said. I have a hard time. A large part of me can separate art from the artist. To some extent. I mean, I'm a huge Michael Jackson fan. That's always been a problem, trying to reconcile my passion for his music, for who he is, and all that kind of stuff. So I haven't rectified it all in my head yet. I think she said some terrible things, but did that constitute her not being re-invited back to the show? I wish she would have kept her mouth shut, because I loved her. And I still have not made up my complete mind about how I feel about what happened, because I don't condone or support the things that she said. I mean, but I also don't think a person should have to shut up to keep their job either. But I think I haven't made peace with it yet, but I was crushed by the whole thing, because she was really one of my favorite female fighting characters that I've seen in a long time. And I just wish the whole thing had happened differently. And I hope if, they end up doing another Cara Dune character or something similar, that they still at least have the decency to stick to the aesthetic she created, and that they have more brute and brawny women like her, because I loved what she was, but I just regret how that all came down. I'm still figuring out. I'm still emotionally dealing with it. I don't completely know how I feel about it, but haven't made peace with it yet. But I did love Cara Dune a lot.
Zaki, what do you think?
I like the character. I'll echo what Carissa said. I mean, she adds texture, great backstory. I love the idea that she's not Mandalorian. She's from Alderaan, and that's just this great extra tragedy. Do I think she is indispensable in the grand story of the Mandalorian? Well, I mean, no, in that this is the Mandalorian, so he is the only indispensable element, and I think we saw that with Grogu parting ways. So if none of this had happened and we just never saw Cara again, I don't know that it would have been at the forefront of my thoughts, like, where's Cara Dune? Now, unfortunately, there is that, we know, and that's why she's not going to be in Rangers of the New Republic. Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what Carissa said about, like, I think that how you conduct yourself on social media, I mean, there's obviously there's a cost involved. Like, well, yeah, you can say all kinds of stuff. That doesn't mean you are guaranteed a featured role in the biggest franchise in the world. So,
Yeah, that's the thing that really gets to me. It's like, you didn't have to post that. Like, you could have just ranted to your friends and family. Like, you didn't have to put it on the internet.
Yeah, there's value in an unexpressed thought sometimes.
All right, so one of the threads over 2 seasons is that we're never told, at least not yet, we're never told what the new Empire really wants with Grogu. Although between needing his blood work and talking about cloning, is this how the Empire tries to bring the Emperor back? You think this is where we're going?
I think so. Yeah, I think they are very deliberately trying to connect the threads that get us from Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens. They're trying to do what the movies themselves didn't do. Yeah.
I mean, if I recall, it's been a long time. I think one of the series, maybe it was Heir to the Empire, or one of them, I can't remember, deals with cloning the Emperor.
I think it was the original Thrawn trilogy, wasn't it?
The Thrawn trilogy.
Yeah, it's just been a long time since I've read them.
No, it's Dark Empire. I'm sorry, it's the
Dark Empire.
Family. It's
right.
the Dark. It's Dark Empire. Yeah.
Right. All right, so let's talk about the finale a little bit. So the season 2 finale had Star Wars fans, including me, in a hyperventilating tizzy over the return of Luke Skywalker. What was your feeling about his return and how they handled it? Carissa.
Okay, I'll try not to talk forever about this, because I'm extremely passionate about that ending. I cried a lot, and I just rewatched it. I didn't cry this time, even though I wanted to, because I didn't want to show up here on But I was talking to my kid about it. As a matter of fact, I was like, the reveal was just so brilliantly done. Like, every little detail that they did. Here's the X-wing, and okay, who's showing up? Because it could just be it could just be the New Republic showing up. And then Grogu perks up, and then you know, oh, this is a Jedi. And then I noticed that you see the cloaked figure with the lightsaber. The first time you see him, it's through the security cameras, and the security cameras are in black and white on purpose. So then you see the lightsaber come out. So you know it's a Jedi, but you don't know which one because they don't show you the color. And then finally, it flips to the live scene where he's actually fighting in front of our point of view, not the security cameras, and the lightsaber's green. And that's the moment I remember being like, oh. And I was by myself that day. I had been watching a lot of this with my son. I got up early and was watching it in the living room, and I'm sitting in the living room by myself, just like, oh my God. And then the next thing you see is him with the gloved hand holding the lightsaber. And then pretty quickly thereafter, you see the other hand that doesn't have the glove. And that, and then I'm screaming at another whole level. And I think I'm probably crying at this point. And then, then I'm 99% sure it's him. And when he walks in and he's getting ready, I was like, if it's not him, if he takes that hood off, and if he's not him, I will reach through the screen and choke somebody. I will choke somebody. Of course, the hood comes off and it's him. And I mean, I'm just like boo-hooing, just boo-hooing. And it all comes down to, this was the Luke I had been wanting to. So I'm 43, a little bit younger than the first movie, came out the year before I was born. But I mean, since I can't even 4, I've been a fan. I mean, I have little bitty girl pictures of me with Leia buns, and I had the figurines and stuff and t-shirts from little. So I don't remember not being a Star Wars, especially a New Hope fan as a kid. So this was what I have waited 40 years to see, this Luke in this moment. All of that led up to this Luke, the most like penultimate badass Luke that we didn't get to see in the trilogy at all. We did not get to see the battle ready fighting Luke like that. And I just felt such an emotional, fandom release of that 40 some years of waiting for this moment to see this Luke. And I mean, I was very emotional. And
all right, Carissa, listen, I have to ask you not to hold back, and please tell us how you're feeling.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of tears. I was
all right. Mary, what about you?
I mean, it was pretty similar. I think I watched it before Carissa, and I think I was like frantically messaging her, being like, Carissa, you have to watch this right now because I need to scream about it with someone. And yeah, my thought process was pretty much the same, because I thought they did the reveal really well, where it's like, there's always a little bit of maybe, but maybe not. And then toward the end, you're just like, you better not be effing with me. I swear to God. But yeah, like I loved how they, I don't know how intentional this was. I mean, I gotta think it was intentional. It kind of mirrored Darth Vader's big scene in Rogue One.
Yes.
Like brings out the lightsaber and chops everyone to bits. And I did notice it was interesting that they made a point to point out that these were all droids, so that Luke could do all this and is like still good guy Luke. He can massacre all these droids and it doesn't matter because they're non-sentient anyway. But yeah, this is like, so I feel like in Rogue One, that was the first time we'd seen Darth Vader at the height of his powers. And this was the first time we've seen Luke at the height of his powers, because when we left him in Return of the Jedi, yeah, he claimed the title of Jedi, but he was still very much a learner. And then the next time he shows up, he's already like, F the Jedi, I'm done. Yeah. So finally we get to see like Jedi Master Luke.
Zaki?
It was great. It was funny because the entirety of the second season, I was not particularly leery of spoilers. I would watch the episodes Friday afternoons when my kids got done with school, and I was like, I'm not staying off social media. I was like, I wasn't worrying about it, But for the last episode, for whatever reason, I felt something in the force. I was like, you know what? I want to watch this one completely cold. I was like, I want to have that feeling. And I woke my kids up early, like before class started on Friday. I was like, let's watch Mandalorian before school. And so I got to have that, there was no like, oh, wait till you see what happens at the end. Like there was none of that, like even that sense. And so that was super cool. Now from earlier in the season, you know Grogu has reached out to somebody, and so in the back of my mind, I was like, I have a feeling it's going to be Luke. That was my thought. I was like, if they're setting it up for something at the end of the season, it's either somebody who's really important to us or somebody totally new, and I don't think it'll be somebody totally new. So that's why I was like, as soon as we see the X-Wing land, I was like, all right, I'm placing my bet. It is Luke. So for me, the fun of it was watching my kids as they slowly realize, and I'm like,
Well, it was funny. I was watching with my son and my wife, and my son, as soon as the X-Wing comes, my son goes, "Daddy, look who it is! Look who it is! It is! It's him! It's him! It's him! It's him!" I'm like, "Who is it?" He goes, "No, look! It's him! I swear, it's him! It's him! It's him!" All right, so
isn't that the best?
oh,
Isn't that the best?
it was amazing. All right, so quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments, send them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so speaking of the finale, so as when I watched it the first time, I thought the finale was just a jaw-dropping. It was incredible. When I rewatched the finale, I found myself feeling that it was oddly anticlimactic in a few points, and I'll explain why. So, one was the Luke scene is still amazing, and I still love it. But I know that so at the very end, Mando he removes his mask in front of everyone. And that was sort of a show of intimacy right there. That's how he's being intimate. But I have to say, I want to just give the little dude a hug. Come on, pick up the little guy and hug him. Just hug the little guy. It was sort of like they never did that because for all we know, they'll never see each other again. I mean, I hope we do, but we don't know. Like you'd think just once you'd be like, "Oh, my little buddy, good luck." So that was just one thought. I don't know if you guys felt the same or not.
I mean, I don't really come from a touchy-feely family, so I didn't get that at all.
But you being cold and distant? No. Well, I can't. You know me. I'm a hugger. I can't help it. So the other thought that struck me was, so the history, and you have to sort of know the animated shows for it to really sink in, but the history of the dark saber is incredibly rich and significant in the animated series. They talk about it a little bit in The Mandalorian, but the depth of what that saber means, it doesn't translate, and you don't know that it doesn't translate because you don't know what you don't know. But yet they kept talking about, even in the scope of The Mandalorian, that whoever holds the dark saber will rule Mandalore. And yet Moff Gideon was defeated pretty easily with a weapon that's supposed to be like that powerful. I never felt like the power and significance of the dark saber was satisfactorily conveyed within the context of The Mandalorian. What did you guys think?
So as someone who hasn't watched the animated shows, I would agree. Like, I feel like when it came out at the end of season 1, I was like, okay, that's a cool glowy stick thingy. And then they started making a big deal out of it in season 2. And I kind of thought they were going to dive in a bit more, but they didn't really. And I kind of wonder how much of that was that they didn't have time to versus like, they just expected people would already know. I mean, I'd like to think that, they kind of assumed people, might not have known, and they might just decide now is not the time to dig into that because we really want to focus on Grogu and his Jedi training more than the history of Mandalore. Maybe they'll get into that more in season 3.
Zaki?
Yeah, to me, to some extent, the dark saber on this series serves as a bit of a MacGuffin, and I think if anything, it hopefully serves as a gateway into people doing what you did, which is diving into the voluminous animated canon, which is so good, and it's I think the dark saber serves its purpose in this show, and the great thing is if you check out the animated stuff, you get to, like you said, look at the history behind it. Look at the significance above and beyond what we see the characters do with.
Okay. All right. Well, I've got an entire notebook full of more notes, but as we always do, it's that time on the show where we are going to spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created especially for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. All right, Karissa, this is your first time up, so you're first. And the categories are Take It to the Cleaners, Back to the Future, The Confidence Conundrum, Inspector Gadget, Adventures in Babysitting, The MCU Revisited, and The Comedy Cellar. All right, you ready? All right, what do we got? Round and round. All right, and you got Adventures in Babysitting. All right, so what is this one? All right, when Mando took on the mantle of responsibility for questing Grogu back to the Jedi, it became a 2-season journey of adventures in babysitting. What do you think Mando charges, and would you hire him to watch your kids?
Yeah, I would watch. Well, okay, you know that I think it's interesting how he always made sure. I mean, it did not well, but he did always make sure that if he had to run off and do something, he tried to find somebody else to watch in his place, which I appreciate that he didn't just try to like lock him up in the ship and go do his adventures. And one of my favorite pseudo babysitters was Amy Sedaris. Oh my gosh, I mean, I'm a huge fan of kind of the Sedaris family as a whole, but her mechanic at Moss Isley type. Wasn't she at Moss Isley? But anyway, wherever she was, he tried to make sure that somebody always watching out for him. He was rarely left on his own. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think he was that neglectful. I'd hire him, but if he wants to be paid in armor, I couldn't. I doubt I would have those kind of resources. So he would be at my price range.
All right, Zaki, you're up next. You ready? All right.
Let's do it.
What do we got for you? We got, you got the same thing. All right, the MCU revisited. All right, so what do we got here? Okay, Mando and company end up fighting the Dark Troopers, which are basically a squad of Iron Men. Who else from the MCU should we introduce into the further adventures of the Mandalorian? Personally, I want to see the Hulk, but that's just me.
You mean like specific characters?
Yes.
Well, I guess Wanda's doing pretty well, incorporating different multiverses. So let's see how she does in the Star Wars universe.
All right, fair enough.
And Vision too. You know what? We Star Wars already has British robots, so let's get another one in there.
All right, Mary, you ready? All right. And you got Take It to the Cleaners. Okay, so what do we got here? Wearing Beskar 24/7 has got to get a little ripe after a while. Where does the Mandalorian go to get his outfit cleaned?
You know what? He probably just tosses it in the machine. Let's be honest, he has no time to get all this like fancy stuff. He probably just has like a little armor washing machine in the back.
That's gotta be a hell of a washer dryer, let me tell you.
I mean, that's why he picked up the Razor Crest in the first place. Comes with a washer dryer. That was the selling point.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's take a couple of questions from the audience. What do we got here? Let's see. Okay. Question. Favorite Star Wars movie that's not Empire Strikes Back? Carissa.
New Hope, I guess, because that for me was my childhood, and it's I can even if I fall asleep a little bit near the end, sorry. I just watched it recently with Mary. I can always go back and watch the New Hope and still love it. So it probably is my favorite other than Empire Strikes Back.
Zaki?
Yeah, Star Wars for me as well. For me, the original trilogy always will, if for no other reason than nostalgia, be at the very top. And for me, Empire Strikes Back is, I think, the best film of the original trilogy. But Star Wars is, I mean, that's the fruit, that's the root rather from which everything else sprang. So you go back, you go back to source, and that's it.
All right, Mary.
Ditto.
Wow, 3 for 3. A bunch of new hopers. Well, I suppose you can't go wrong with the original. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a different element tonight. Since we're all writers, we're going to shift a little bit of gears. let's discuss how much I love you and I hate you. As writers, when we put our work and ourselves out there, criticism of all kinds comes with it. The reviewers love you or they hate you, and sometimes they're indifferent. So, Mary, I'll start with you. How do you feel about reviews? Do you take them to heart? Do you let them roll off you? Do some stick with you more than others?
I feel like it's definitely evolved as I've grown as a writer. Like when my first book came out, I read every single review like religiously just because I just so need to know what everyone was saying. And then the more I wrote, the more I was like, you know what? It's nice to know sometimes, especially when they're saying nice things about you. I think I read a couple of mean reviews just like to see what people were saying. And some were fair. It's like, if you don't like romance, you're not going to like my book. And others were just like really boneheaded. And I was like, I don't need to be reading this right now. So now I'm of the mind that's like, say whatever you want. I probably won't read the review unless like someone points it out to me and says, hey, someone said something really nice about you.
Okay. Zaki?
It's interesting because I am primarily a critic. So everything you're saying here is something that's very much at the forefront of my thinking. I'm acutely aware of the fact that the people who are responsible for the films and things that I critique are likely to have my work cross their eye line at some point, and so my approach is always, even if I'm even if my net result is like, I wasn't crazy about this, I try to frame it in the sense of, here's what I thought worked, and I appreciated what they were going for here. On balance, this part didn't work for me, and I try to view it as the same kind of critique I give like when I grade my students giving their speeches, where I'm like, I appreciate the work that you put in, here's what I would like to see done differently. And I say that because, again, I think there's a tendency, especially in clickbait journalism, to, the nastier you can be, the more clicks you're going to get, and if people really try to look at Roger Ebert's I hated that movie approach, as opposed to all of his positive reviews, and I think we've lost sight of that a little bit. I think there, when we talk about criticism, there needs to be constructive, implicit in that, which is, well, here's what didn't work, but here's why I think it could be improved upon.
Karissa?
I'm similar to Mary. Been doing this long enough now to have developed a pretty thick skin. By the time whatever I've written has gotten to market, it has been through a lot of critique and criticism, a lot of editing, a lot of beta reading. And by the time I put it out, it is what I want it to be. I'm not going to change it. So I do. I am interested in the reaction of it, but I've also gotten to the point in my life where I'm basically writing for myself and nobody else. If it makes me happy, that's good enough. I do appreciate if somebody doesn't like it, to write a constructive reason why. Because then, I mean, it's rare that I'm going to read a review that's ever going to change my mind about the way I write or do something different in the future. But when it's insightful criticism, that can be helpful in my future processes sometimes. But I have rarely ever found it to be constructive or helpful. It's usually just comes down to taste, and there's nothing I can do about if your taste just isn't the same as mine. I'm not going to suit every taste, and that's okay. And I've learned to be able to distinguish between I wrote something badly, or okay, you just didn't like that because you don't like that particular type of element or trope or writing or whatever, and there's nothing I can do to make you like that.
Fair enough. All right, so there was actually one question that I missed in the chat box I did want to bring up, so I'm going to go back to Mandalorian real quick. All right, this one, I'll start off with Mary. Do you think Mando and Grogu will reunite? Will Din get to grow more as a parent, or will the show shift to other themes? What do you think?
I think they will reunite eventually. I don't know if it's going to happen in season 3, especially with where they kind of left things. And considering like what they're doing like behind the scenes with them taking a year off from The Mandalorian to do the Book of Boba Fett, I wonder if there's going to be a time jump the next time we see The Mandalorian. If it's going to be, okay, let's skip ahead a few years to like when Grogu has spent some time training with Luke, and whether like he might be have completed and off like come back or something. So yes, I think they will be reunited. I wouldn't hold my breath for season 3. Maybe at the very end, like that might be their big season 3 finale or something.
Zaki?
Yeah, I think, the thought I had is if Grogu ends up at Luke's Jedi school, then he might end up on the wrong side of Kylo Ren's lightsaber. So, and I don't think anybody wants that. So I feel like getting Grogu and Din back together is a way of them averting that eventuality. I think, no, don't worry. He's fine, something like that.
I will say, I meant to say it before. I forgot as we go. We were talking about, how exciting it was to see Luke again, after, and Mary, you sort of touched upon it. I think part of the catharsis was that, so I saw Star Wars in the theater. I was 6 years old. So I've been literally going to see Star Wars movies since 1977. So we didn't see Luke on screen between Jedi and the very last frame of the, what was it? The first.
Force Awakens.
Right. It was what, 30 years or whatever it was. And we only saw him. And he was just a shaggy old man. And then in Last Jedi, we won't even talk about for right now about how awful he got treated. I think part of it was a catharsis of, yes, that is what Luke is supposed to be. You screwed me in that movie, but we got it back. But in any case, okay, so here's what we're going to do. Let's do a little shameless promotion, and then we're going to wrap up the show. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to show what we got here. All right, hold on. Is this working? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Did I do this right?
Yeah, I see my book.
Okay, there we go. Good. All right, so what do we got? Carissa, talk to me.
Okay, so this is an anthology that just came out last week, I guess. A group of authors. I was invited to participate.
Oh, sorry.
It's a young adult anthology of short stories. The theme is transformation. All the stories, most of them have a fantastical element that wasn't.
Oh, sorry about this. Hold on, something just went on. I got to reshare. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I blew that one there. There we go.
But it's the best thing about it is you can get an ebook or paperback, and the ebook is 100% free and perma-free. So go check it out. My story is of marshmallows and monsters. It's about cryptids, and basically it's a young adult version of Pit Bulls and Parolees. A juvenile delinquent finds redemption by rehabilitating a cryptid at a halfway house for juvenile delinquents.
All right. So Zaki, I didn't have an image for you. Anything else? Anything you want to share with the folks?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, check out the San Francisco Chronicle. You can see I've done several write-ups at this point about The Mandalorian. I've also got a piece looking at various Easter eggs in WandaVision. And just this week, I have a full review of Superman and Lois, the new series on the CW. And I also did an article looking back at the history of Superman and Lois across different media incarnations from the 1930s until now. I think people will enjoy checking that out.
All right. Mary, what do we got?
Just want to give a plug to my young adult sci-fi trilogy, the Star Swept series. It's about a teen girl in the future who attends this prestigious performing arts school, and she's hoping that if she's good enough, she'll have a career on this utopian alien planet across the stars. That's all like really, really into like earthling music and dance and such. But then she meets a young alien boy, and it turns out things are not what they seem, and it just kind of goes downhill from there. So yeah, they're available in ebook, hardback, and paperback. And the first two already have audiobooks, and the third one, the audiobook is currently in production and should be out shortly. So yeah, check them out.
And who is that Mary fan lookalike on the cover of all three books?
Oh yeah, the cover model is my sister, Angel Fan. And to get that shot, we put her in this big long dress and we dunked her in a pool. We shot her underwater.
All right, fair enough. All right, and since we've been talking about space opera, with action, humor, and suspense, I'll encourage you to check out my novel Crossline, about a modern-day space pilot thrust into a parallel Earth, caught between rebellion, Armageddon, and a desperate fight to get home. And if sci-fi mystery is more your game, I'll point to my sci-fi mystery, Crackle and Fire, featuring my hard-boiled intergalactic private eye Angela Hardwick, who is part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, and part Philip Marlowe. They're both available in ebook and paperback and published by Crazy 8 Press. Okay, so that's all I got for today. Hang on, let me get rid of this. All right, that's all I got for today. I want to thank Zaki. I want to thank Carissa and Mary for joining us today, and I want to thank everyone who is watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care, guys.